Hey everybody, it's Ricardo Gorski, the founder of Tax One, where we help individuals and businesses pay as little tax as legally possible. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the Cyprus Holding structure because I see more and more interest from individuals that reach out to us regarding a Cyprus Holding structure. And that is one, from individuals that actually physically relocate to Cyprus or already live here, but also two, from individuals and or businesses that are not physically in Cyprus and they want to leverage the Cyprus Holding structure for various different benefits that I'm going to discuss in this video. And with that being said, let's take a look at the first question, and that is, why should you open up a Cyprus Holding structure in the first place? And for that, I noted down 5 different reasons that I'm going to explain to you now. And that is, first, various different tax benefits that I'm going to explain in more detail later on. But in short, the main tax benefits include things like no capital gains tax, no withholding tax, no dividend tax, and various different double tax treaties. But first, reason number 2 is also, of course, asset protection, because a holding company also acts like an additional shield for your personal and or business assets and removes personal and or business risk or liabilities from it. So let's take an asset, for example, that you personally own and are liable for. If you put it into a holding company, then in that case, the ownership of this asset is technically transferred to a legal entity instead of you owning it as a natural person. It is not exactly the same as with a trust vehicle, for example, which I'm also going to explain in future videos, but we're getting very close. And also, number 3 is international structure, because especially for businessmen and entrepreneurs that do business around the globe, a holding company makes sense if your current setup is, for example, outside of the European Union and you want to have an entity within the EU because of banking reasons, legal reasons, and this also leads to number 4, and that is business expansion. Again, especially relevant for non-European entrepreneurs that want to enter the European market, but also relevant for European entrepreneurs that want to expand their business and kind of centralize all of their assets and businesses and investments under one vehicle. And when you have this typical holding setup, which basically looks like that, where you have holding company, and this holding company then owns trading company number 1, asset number 2, or investment number 3. And this can go on, and this is then also relevant for number 5, which is exit planning. If you are a serialpreneur, meaning you have multiple different businesses and or you're an investor into multiple different startups, businesses, etc., then you're definitely interested in exiting those businesses and or investments. And for that, a holding structure like I beautifully draw here is just so much more efficient and less hassle for future exits from a tax point of view, a legal and bureaucratic point of view, because all the investments are centralized under this mother holding company. And so, yes, I know there are various different jurisdictions for holding companies. It is not just Cyprus that offers this vehicle. Actually, in Cyprus itself, there is no real distinction between a trading company and a holding company. Meaning, if you incorporate a Cyprus limited company here in Cyprus, then it can operate as a trading company, but also it can operate as a holding company. There is no real distinction in the Cyprus law. And also there are various other jurisdictions. Also Malta, for example, offers a very favorable holding setup. But this video is all about the Cyprus Holding structure because it has a lot of benefits that I'm going to explain to you now. First, let's start with the general benefits, so to say, and that is number 1, definitely the costs for incorporation, administration, and maintenance are super low compared to Malta, for example. We are looking at a price at less than 1,500 euros for a company formation here in Cyprus. I have a separate video talking about all the expenses that you can expect when you relocate to Cyprus, open up a company here, a trust, all of that. I have a whole list with all prices in another 30 minutes video. Definitely recommend that. But other than that, we also have the British common law here in Cyprus, because Cyprus used to be a British colony, and a common law country is fundamentally very different from a civil law country like Germany, for example, because common law countries are much more flexible when it comes to business politics and all that. And that also leads to the next point, which is the freedom of banking and currencies. With a Cyprus limited company, you have a lot of options for banking. That is as simple as Revolut and Wise, for example, neobanks or EMIs, whatever you want to call it. Then we have a lot of local bank options. And yes, I am aware that Cyprus's reputation is not the best when it comes to local banking, but this is a whole different topic, and I will definitely make a video explaining why Cyprus's bank sector has recovered so well from the banking crisis, and it will not happen again that a haircut will be imposed. But this is, again, as I said, a different topic. Video will follow very soon. Cyprus's reputation is very good nowadays. There is no signs of being blacklisted and or grey listed. You can definitely open up private bank accounts with a Cyprus tax residency, for example. And also opening up business bank accounts is not a problem in many jurisdictions. I would even argue that it is much easier than with a UAE company, for example. As said, the local banking is strong, has recovered very well. And a very good benefit of a Cyprus company is that it can be re-domiciled if for whatever reason in the future you would want to change the jurisdiction of your holding company, you can do so. And Cyprus companies in general have the benefit of carrying forward losses, which means you can basically deduct losses that you have in previous tax calendar years in future tax calendar years. And within a group, doesn't necessarily need to be a holding structure, but it applies to holding structures where sister companies can share those losses. So let's say you have a business A and a business B, and if business A makes substantial amount of losses, you could then share these losses with the sister company B, for example, which is definitely a benefit for accounting, tax purposes, but this gets very technical. So if you're interested in that, definitely make sure to book an individual consultation call, and we are happy to explain further. Also, holding companies give you the benefit of delaying the 2.65% NHS contribution, which applies on dividend distribution to natural persons. If the holding company receives dividends, the 2.65% NHS contribution is not payable right away, which is also a little benefit if you want to have cash flow or whatever the reason is for that. Just wanted to mention it. Then now the most interesting part, and that is the tax benefits. And let's just start with the corporate tax rate, which is 12.5% on the net profit. Yes, I am aware of the current tax reform of Cyprus, where we expect an increase of the corporate tax from 12.5% to 15%, most likely in 2026. But also we have the eligibility for a 2.5% corporate tax with the IP box regime, which we also have a separate video about. And this 2.5% effective corporate tax can be achieved by businesses that have an intellectual property, where we are going to use the qualifying income and qualifying expenses. And with a specific formula, we then calculate your effective tax rate, which can be from 2.5% all the way to 12.5% and 15%, something in between there. And yes, this is also aligned with OECD's BEPS, which is basically a new legislation next to the global minimum corporate tax, which will be relevant in the future worldwide. And then also here we have a little screenshot of the double tax treaties from the Cyprus government website, where we see that Cyprus has a substantial amount of double tax treaties, as said earlier. And then we are going to discuss the next tax benefit, which is 0% dividend tax from all Cyprus resident companies. So receiving dividends from Cyprus resident companies is very straightforward. There is no dividend tax at all when shifting the dividends to the mother holding company. And also there is 0% dividend tax from foreign subsidiaries, but I added a little note here. Requirements do apply. So there are a few factors that we need to consider and that we are more than happy to explain in an individual consultation call. But generally, in most cases, there is also no dividend tax from foreign subsidiaries, because otherwise the Cyprus holding structure wouldn't be that beneficial. So in general, you can also expect 0% dividend tax from non-Cyprus resident companies, and the same applies to withholding tax. So we have 0% withholding tax on incoming EU dividends, interest, and royalties, with the exception though, when it is about property sales. Then we do have a local tax for every property that is or was sold. And again, for non-EU incoming dividends, royalties, interest, income, we have requirements apply again. But again, in most cases, it is 0% withholding tax unless double tax treaties prohibit so. So, for example, in the USA, there is a 15% approximately withholding tax that we can't bypass, not even with a Cyprus holding company. But this, again, becomes very individual. We would need to look into your current jurisdiction, wherever you are currently living in and or have businesses in. And then we will definitely check the double tax treaties. And something that is new, which I screenshotted right here, is the fact that, let me just read it out, it's from Ernst & Young. Effective 1st of January 26, dividend payments to associated companies in low tax jurisdictions will incur a 17% withholding tax, WHT. So, in short, dividends to tax havens are subject to a 17% withholding tax. What is a tax haven? It is a jurisdiction where the corporate tax is less than 9%. So for example, if you would have a company in the Bahamas where there is 0% corporate tax, if you were to send dividends to the Bahamas from Cyprus from January 1st, 2026, a withholding tax on Cyprus ground applies. We will definitely update you on that matter in the future, how this will affect you, most entrepreneurs. That's definitely gonna be interesting. But most of the times, incoming dividends and the taxation on that is relevant because you want to accumulate your income here in Cyprus, then eventually in the future become a non-dom resident, for example, where you can also receive dividends to your private bank account at 0% dividend tax. The only tax that applies is the 2.65%. So in that case, in that scenario, if that is your goal, which is the goal of most of our clients, then the outgoing withholding tax doesn't even matter. But I wanted to mention it here. Next is the capital gains tax, which is, who believes it, 0% upon sales and liquidations and some other cases. And the good thing is that this also applies to subsidiaries. So if we remember the drawing that I did earlier, yes, the capital gains tax is 0 at the holding level, but also to the trading level, the companies that are owned by the holding company, with again the exception of property sales. And those are quite some tax benefits for a holding setup, especially considering that the setup is extremely cheap, easy to set up, maintenance is easy, accounting is easy, auditing is easy and cheap. So those are like the main benefits when it comes to a Cyprus holding company. Of course, we are more than happy to also advise you in your individual case if it makes sense for you. And so let's quickly talk about for whom is a Cyprus holding company. And I noted down that it is for international investors and businesses seeking a EU holding. So if you're currently outside of the EU, you have your business, but you regularly interact with businesses or customers in the European Union and you want to exploit the EU banking system, which is definitely easy with the IBAN system and all that, then in that case, a Cyprus holding company definitely makes sense. But also for entrepreneurs that want to protect and centralize their assets. A good example here is me. I'm currently looking into a Cyprus holding setup where I will have a holding company that is 100% owned by me. And then from here, I will have companies where I'm sharing trading companies with my business partners, but the holding company is 100% owned by me. And the trading or business companies like Tax One or Off Plan One, for example, where I have my partners, these companies' shares are then shareable, so to say. Then, as said earlier, serialpreneurs for sure. If you have multiple businesses, you probably already have a holding company or you're looking into one because it is almost essential for you. And also for family offices with the intention to set up a trust in the future. So if I set up my holding company in the future when I have kids, I'm definitely also going to look into a trust. Is Cyprus International Trust is a very good example where I will have my kids as the beneficiaries. I will then settle all of my private assets, business assets into the trust after a period of 2 years. the ownership is successfully transferred to the trust. I, Ricardo Gorski, do not own my assets anymore. And then in the case of passing away, all of my assets will be transferred to the beneficiaries, which will be my kids, completely tax-free, which is one of the best wealth protection, asset protection vehicles, because in countries like the UK, for example, inheritance tax can be as high as 40%. And the good thing is recognized by the EU and bypasses even local inheritance and probate laws, tax and rules. So with a Cyprus trust, depending on where your kids live, they could even inherit your assets, even if they are not Cyprus tax resident, even if you are not a Cyprus tax resident. So family offices definitely also can take big advantages of Cyprus holding companies and trusts as well. Next, investors that regularly sell shares. And yes, this could be publicly listed shares like stocks that you trade, buy and sell, whatever you do, but also privately owned companies where instead of, or let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, I sold a little side business, and I could have sold this side business via a normal invoice within a trading company. But what I did is I sold 100% of the shares of this company, and I transferred the ownership of the company, so to say, and the shares that I sold here were tax exempt. There was no corporate tax that applied. And exactly this concept is what you can take advantage of with a Cyprus holding company, where you can place assets into subsidiaries and just sell the subsidiaries at 0% tax, as we learned earlier. But also entities like businesses, for example, looking for low-cost setup and maintenance jurisdictions. That basically combines what we said earlier. It is just super simple to set up a company here in Cyprus. It is cheap, and there are a lot of businesses, businessmen, entrepreneurs that are looking for a low-cost setup where they don't want to have a huge bureaucratic hustle and process where it's not even worth the time and providing all these kinds of documents, having a hard time setting up a bank account and all that. Cyprus is definitely very, very simple when it comes to that. And we are more than happy to assist you in every step of the way. And this leads to the next and last point, which is how to set up a Cyprus holding company. Yes, okay, Ricardo, it sounds interesting, but how do I do it? And the first step is always the KYC onboarding, where we send you a list of all the documents that we require from you, which is one, documents that we are legally required to collect from all customers. Every law firm in Cyprus has to do it, but also two, AML documents that we are required to collect from you for AML purposes. Sounds complicated, but trust me, it's not. We will guide you through every step of the way. And number two is the name approval. So we would need to have 3 name suggestions from you for the name of the holding company that we are then going to present to the registrar of companies. And if they approve the name, we will then register it with the registrar of companies. And this is the moment where your company is successfully incorporated. We will then send you a set of certificates, which includes like the certificates for the registered address, the certificates for the shareholders, memorandum of association, and all those things that you then need for opening up bank accounts. Payment providers like Stripe, for example, they will all ask you for those documents, but also for UBO entries and things like that. And then number 4 is the operations of your company or companies, the administration, the accounting, the auditing, and as Tax One is a one-stop shop, we can definitely assist you with all those things, from setting it up over to accounting and then auditing and setting up an international tax structure. Whatever you need as an entrepreneur, we can deliver it to you. And then very, very important, I didn't even mention it yet because I wanted to leave it towards the end, as it is the most important thing, especially for foreign shareholders and people that don't intend to live in Cyprus and they just want to take advantage of the benefits of a Cyprus holding company, and that is exercising management and control. And for that, I have a few notes here because management and control in Cyprus is very interesting because it is not really defined in the tax legislation. But there are a few factors that play an important role when it comes to management and control, or substance, or economic center, whatever you want to call it. It all basically describes the same thing, and that is, does your Cyprus company have a strong reason to operate in Cyprus and be liable for Cyprus tax compared to the taxes in various other jurisdictions because they are much higher there, especially if you live in a higher tax country. And so what the tax authorities will look at is, one, the residencies of the board. And you can be the shareholder of a company in Cyprus, but you don't necessarily need to be a director. So you could appoint a local director, which is a Cyprus tax resident, for example. And the interesting thing in Cyprus is that a Cyprus tax resident can be a director in up to 10 companies. But it's not just that, it is also their relation to the business. So for example, let's say your accountant will be appointed the local director of your company and is part of the board. But the business is about real estate and your accountant doesn't even own a property, he has no idea about real estate at all, then the tax authorities will definitely be a bit skeptical about the board not being able to even explain what the business is about. So the relation is also very important. Does the director have an expertise in the business activity? Because also every company actually has a business activity, a business field, a sector, an industry that needs to be declared upon company formation. And now, next, the remuneration of the board, meaning how is the director getting paid here in Cyprus? Because a nominee setup where you pay 500 euros a year is not enough for many years now. The directors need to be paid at an arm's length. A salary that makes sense, so to say. Because if the company's turnover is 5 million euros, but the local director receives the minimum salary, which is 1,000 euros a month here in Cyprus, and you then don't even pay the social insurance, which would be the worst case scenario. The social insurance obviously also needs to be paid. Every employee also needs to be hired under an engagement letter basis. And so all of this basically comes to the conclusion that the remuneration, the salary, the payment of the local director needs to make sense. It needs to be coherent with the company's revenue. And as these numbers are super individual based on each specific case, I cannot really give you numbers and amounts here in this video. But what I can tell you is that by Cyprus law, it definitely needs to be the minimum salary of 1,000 euros, which then also implies that a holding company or fulfilling management and control in Cyprus only makes sense if there is substantial revenue. This is also connected to the next point, which is the director's control over the business, which is also very important, which implies things like, does the director have actual control, not just management, but also control over the business, meaning does he have access to the bank accounts, does he have access to email and communication with business partners and consumers, clients, whatever there is. And then this goes back to management, the place of board meetings, very important, and the location of the strategic decisions. It's not really the day-to-day decisions, but strategic decisions, which means, are you as a shareholder regularly coming to Cyprus to host board meetings and make strategic decisions with the local director, so to say? And this is only to a certain extent, of course, because no one, not the government, not the tax authorities, can tell you how you run your business. And if you run your business with just one board meeting per year or an online board meeting, whatever it is, then this is how you run your business. And if all the letters and documents and the reasonings and justifications are in place for why you still have a Cyprus company with a local address here, with employees in Cyprus, a physical office maybe, and all that, then this is how you run your business. And even if you're not in Cyprus, you can still run your business in Cyprus. But as you see, this is getting quite complex, and this is mainly relevant for individuals that don't plan to reside in Cyprus and become a Cyprus tax resident, because only then MNC will apply. So if you're not going to reside in Cyprus, then definitely make sure to reach out to us on tax.one. We are more than happy to explain to you how the management and control test of your Cyprus company actually works, or also called a residency test. And then everyone that is actually physically relocating to Cyprus start a new life here in Cyprus. For you, this is our main service. This is our expertise. I also relocated to Cyprus 6 years ago now, so definitely also make sure to reach out to us on tax.one, and we are more than happy to assist you. And with that being said, thank you very much for watching the video, and if you subscribe, I will see you in the next one.